Welcome back, everyone. We have an update to a video that I did about 3 weeks ago, and I thought was a settled issue because I didn't think the ATF would be crazy enough to push it, but they did. They decided to go all in on their frame and receiver rule, and honestly, I think it's a strategic mistake for them for sure, as we will get to why that is here in just a second. So for folks that haven't been following, about 2 years ago, the ATF, I guess 3 years ago now, the ATF decided that they were going to change the definition of a firearm frame and receiver to make it essentially any piece of plastic, any piece of aluminum, any piece of steel that they decided was a firearm as an executive agency. We will get back to why that is crazy here in a second. But what they were going after ostensibly was ghost guns, something like this, which you could purchase without a background check, have it sent to your house, and then finish out on your own. Now, for new folks here, I always like to point out that since literally the day America became a country, and even before that, you could always build your own firearms for your own use. In America, you still can to this day. There's no rule against that. So I just want to make that clear, but that is what they're targeting. And the ATF, of course, was slapped down by the Fifth Circuit, as we've talked about previously here on the channel, and basically the Fifth Circuit said you can't do that, you can't change the rule. And so before we get into what they did, a couple of things I want to talk about. So today's video is going to be a Mug Club episode, as these end of the week episodes tend to be. We're going to do our video here on YouTube and Rumble, and we're going to talk about the issue. Then we're going to head over to Mug Club and take some general questions. I did that a couple weeks ago, not just gun stuff, and the episode went crazy. And so we're revisiting that, and we're going to be talking about like societal issues and things like that over there, my take on that. So if you guys want to see that content, you can sign up for the link at the video here on your screen. Additionally, code Mr. Guns and Gear will get you guys a free month over there where we can talk about things uncensored from big tech. So definitely check that out if you are interested. Now, as I was getting to, what are we talking about here? Well, I think we need to establish the actual law, like the federal law of what a frame or receiver is prior to this rule. So essentially, the frame or receiver in federal law is the part of a firearm which provides housing for the hammer, bolt, or breech lock and firing mechanism, and which is usually threaded at its forward position to receive the barrel. So that is the law prior to the frame and receiver rule that the ATF passed or put through or put into executive action years ago. So there's a lot of problems. Anybody who actually just listened to what I said and thought about it, you guys will realize that a lot of things that we consider firearms in America are not firearms. The biggest one that comes to mind when you read that is that the AR-15 receiver is not a firearm. It's absolutely not a firearm. It has no mechanism for threading in the front. It doesn't have the breech block, etc. in there, so it doesn't meet that definition. And AR-15s, of course, are one of the, if not the most popular rifle in America. They're definitely the most popular rifle in America. They're one of the most popular firearms in America is what I meant to say. But it also doesn't cover something like this frame here on a handgun. So obviously this would not be a serialized firearm for transfer, even completed, if we were to go on the actual legal definition of a firearm. So the ATF has just kind of said things like the AR-15 receiver is a firearm. This thing right here on a finished gun is the receiver and has to be serialized. And for 40 years or so, we've just kind of gone along with that as the status quo in America. And by the ATF pushing this up to the Supreme Court, which is what they've done now, I think they're opening a can of worms they might not want opened. So basically, they, again, were slapped down in the Fifth Circuit. They appealed it, slapped down again, and have appealed it now up to the Supreme Court level. And I'm going to get into the written argument that they're making here a little bit here, but I kind of just want to talk about the overall big picture of this in this video, but I need to delve into a couple of the arguments they're making because I think they're gonna get slapped, in my opinion. That's my guess if this happens. But before I suppose I should talk about that, like what could actually happen with this case in the legal world, right? So there's a few things. There's like three things that most people agree could happen. So the Supreme Court could either just deny this appeal, and then it would go back to the Fifth Circuit. They could stay the appeal, which I highly doubt this current Supreme Court is going to stay the appeal, or the Supreme Court could take the case on. And that is where, in my opinion, the risk for the ATF and the Department of Justice comes into play, and the benefit for us in America could be just huge. So again, let's get into what we're talking about here. Contrary to the district court's conclusion, a weapon parts kit falls squarely within the plain meaning of statutory definition, which expressly includes items that can be readily converted into functional firearms. Every speaker of English would recognize that a tax on the sales of bookshelves applies to IKEA when it sells boxes of parts and tools and instructions for assembling them into bookshelves. So first off, again, that is a dangerous road that the ATF wants to go in, because they're trying to say essentially what the average person would think of when they think of a bookshelf is what attacks on bookshelves would apply to. So that is very dangerous for legal reasons. If you just want to apply what the average person would think of standard to things, there's a whole lot of laws that fall apart real quickly. Second, the term frame or receiver is naturally read to include a partially completed frame or receiver that can readily be made functional. Again, that accords with ordinary usage. Just as a bicycle is still a bicycle even when it is sold without pedals, a frame or receiver is still a frame or receiver, even if the buyer must drill a few holes or remove some plastic tabs before attaching other parts of the firearm. Again, so what they are saying there is just the ordinary assumption of what something is. That, again, is a very dangerous precedent that we want to get to, because if that applies to firearms, then there's pretty much no one that is going to say this is a firearm, particularly when you go back to the actual federal definition of what a frame or receiver is. There's no breech block on here. An ordinary person probably wouldn't think there was. The next argument they're making is essentially that if this piece can be sold to the general public without a background check, which again, you've always been able to build your own firearms in America. You can go to Home Depot, buy a couple of tubes, and have a functional shotgun tomorrow. So they're making the claim that these things are dangerous, and that's the reason that they should be banned and regulated. So in 2022, they say the ATF responded to a crisis, which is not true. There was actually no crisis at all. They're responding to a whitehouse.gov posting where President Biden called on lawmakers to regulate these dangerous items. So that is the crisis that they're referring to, by issuing a regulation updating its interpretation of the statutory definition of a regulated firearm. In defining that term, Congress recognized that limiting the federal firearms laws to functional firearms would invite evasion, and it thus broadly defined firearm to include any weapon that will or is designed to or may be readily converted to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. So again, that is what the ATF was trying to switch everything to, and saying that that's the new frame or receiver rule. That's absolutely, again, not federal law. That is what the ATF just said in their rule that they can do, and that comes into play in the final point that they're making. Just before getting into the final part, I need to preface it by what the ATF wrote in about 4 pages, but basically what they're saying is that because the Fifth Circuit made the rule universal to everyone in America, i.e. saying that everyone can have these and that the ATF's rule is gone, thrown out in the trash, that they made it universal. So that's what they're getting into here. Instead of just applying it to the actual plaintiffs, which was 2 different people, they applied it to all Americans. So with that knowledge, let's understand what they're talking about here. Universal relief also creates other constitutional, legal, and practical problems. It strains our separation of powers by allowing individual judges to act more like a legislature by decreeing the rights and duties of people nationwide. If the contradiction that they're saying here doesn't immediately jump out at you as you guys were just hearing that and seeing it on your screen, they're saying it strains the separation of powers. So in America, for those who are new here and just maybe got a public education in current American schools, there is a separation of powers in America. We have 3 different branches: the judicial, the executive, and then the legislative. And they're saying that a judge making a determination, a legal determination on a rule that the ATF, which again is part of the executive branch, just made up and didn't go through Congress to pass, is straining the separation of powers. So obviously, the ATF here doesn't understand the irony that they can just make up rules in their own mind, and those should be laws without going through Congress, but a judge cannot slap down those rules without going through Congress. Doesn't make any sense, does it? But that is the argument that they're trying to make in front of the Supreme Court. So again, you guys should be able to read this down below. I will leave a link to the whole thing. It's only like 30-something pages. It's easily digestible. Actually, it's 43 pages, but it's easily digestible if you want to read through it. And again, I think they're opening up the Pandora's box here by taking this in front of our current Supreme Court. Our current Supreme Court just recently made a ruling stating that any firearms law has to be based in the text, history, and tradition of the United States of America. So again, in 1791, when our Constitution was passed, and even before that, when we were a British territory, there was no history or tradition that banned certain parts for sale and or allowed an executive branch to make a law. There wasn't one. So I think which you never know with the Supreme Court and what they're prioritizing in a particular session, but if they take this case, I think it has the possibility to throw out all of the loosely agreed upon, I guess we could say, frame or receiver laws out the window. Like I was saying, again, this is considered a frame or receiver on a handgun. by the definition of a frame or receiver, it doesn't meet it. The AR-15 does not meet the definition of a frame or receiver at all. So I think the ATF is making, and the Department of Justice are making a very risky gamble, taking this to the Supreme Court, because again, these are not like I mean, they're all important, obviously. Incrementalism is a real thing, but these aren't like a huge deal in America if we're talking like regulating guns, right? Let's just be real. They're just not. Like, for every one of these in America, there's, I don't know, 1,000 of these, if that makes sense, right? So the ability in the Pandora's box they're opening, where now, by making this argument, they could make these in AR-15 lower receivers completely up for sale without a background check, which obviously is a step in the right direction, because, you know, background checks are unconstitutional. I think anybody who understands the text, history, and tradition of the United States understands that. So they're opening up a huge Pandora's box, and I think if the Supreme Court takes this, that is likely a possibility that we could see. So I don't know if the ATF and the Department of Justice know something I don't know, but just reading this here, I think they may be biting off a little bit more than they can chew, so to say. So with that, guys, let me know what you think down below. I'll be interested to hearing your comments. This is a breaking case as of when I'm making this. I think it just came out less than 20 hours ago as of when I'm recording this. So let me know what you think, because I haven't seen a lot of videos on this so far, and I think it could get interesting. And I believe this has to be at least initially ruled on by August 4th. So things could happen real quickly in this case. I don't know if they can push that down the road, but some sort of ruling on it has to be made relatively quickly. So stay tuned for that. Let me know down below. I look forward to seeing that. If we have any type of deals on firearms parts, optics, ammo, firearms themselves, they will go out in my daily deals email. You guys can sign up for that here on your screen. Of course, if you aren't following me across my various social media sites, I recommend you do that, because that is where the breaking news typically breaks here on the channel, because we can make posts a lot quicker than we can make full production videos. Additionally, if you guys aren't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. If you're not seeing 2 to 4 videos a week here on the channel, then you're being censored by a big tech algorithm. So to override that, or go around that, I suppose you could say, you can sign up for my email here. It's different. It's not the Daily Deals email, and it has all of the videos since the previous month's email came out. So that way there's no big tech giant censoring your eyes from my content. It goes straight from me to you via that email. So that way you always see the content. And again, with that, that's all I have for you guys. Thanks for watching. Look forward to your comments. Now we'll see you over on Mug Club.